Brandon.
We'll wait for Trustee Rogan and then we'll start. Okay, welcome Trustee Rogan.
Evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Good evening.
All right, we're ready to go. Would you like to kick it off, Administrator Simonson?
Sure. Tonight is our follow-up workshop following the weekend workshop that we had where the staff presented a proposed 2022 budget to the Board of Trustees. There were several questions asked that day, so Director Eystone and myself have tried to address those to you in writing to try to save a little time tonight, give you a little time to think about some of those. And then, so the agenda for tonight would be follow up on any of these questions that you may have, additional research you want us to do in that area. And then we are thinking the bulk of tonight's session, since we have about an hour and 10 minutes, would be going through the board and commission request so that we can make final adjustments to the budget before we prepare it in its final form for November 15th or December 6th, depending on where we're at with our timing. So I'm going to turn it over to Cassie. You're there, and you'll be able to share your screen, I believe, when we're ready to. But at this point, we do want to just look at the follow-up questions that you guys had from the October 16th meeting and see if there's a preference, I guess, by the board. Do you want to go through those, or have you had time, and are there any additional questions?
Can we go through these one at a time and get a direction on from the board on how we want to proceed in regard to each question?
Sure, if that's your preference, we can.
I don't think it'll take too long.
Okay, that's fine. Cassie, do you want to do that with them? Or do you want me to?
No, I can do that, and I can just share my screen as well, and bring up the questions if that's easier.
Oh, while you're doing that, I guess we can start with number one was, what is the town's sales tax in comparison to other municipalities around us? Oh, there, yep.
There we go.
I don't know if you can enlarge that at all. It's not too bad, but sometimes.
Yes, I sure can. Yep.
Thank you.
That?
So after that question was asked, thank you, that's great. What we found is that there's several municipalities that are at 3.50, the same as our local tax. And there's several above that, of course, in the town of Ward below it. But at this point, staff's recommendation would not be to change that unless there's a specific use that the board would like to pursue on this.
Are there any members of the Board of Trustees that have any input in regard to question one? All right, proceed.
The next question we had was, what was the town's marijuana tax in comparison with municipalities that were in close distance to us? And so we just did a comparison with Boulder and Longmont. As you can see, Longmont is same regular sales tax as Lyons, and then their marijuana tax is just 0.5% less than Lyons. And then the city of Boulder's marijuana tax is right in line with Lyons, but their regular city sales tax is a little bit higher. So individuals pay a little bit higher total sales tax in Boulder.
Do any members of the Board of Trustees wish to discuss question two?
Okay. Question 3 had to do with grant income compared to budget. This is going to take a little more research than what we had time for, and I will ask the board if they want staff to continue to spend time on this. What we found out just in talking with people is, we're heavily grant dependent these last few years compared to anyone around us. But if the board wants us to continue, we have to come up with what does the comparison want to be against, like against general fund or grant income compared to all funds. It will be quite a bit of work.
Any input from the Board of Trustees on question 3?
I just don't think it's necessary.
I'd agree. Thank you for looking into it. And thank you for the detailed answers to the previous questions.
Yeah, I agree. We all know that we're high on grant income because of the flood and the size of the town. I don't think there's any reason to have to spend a lot of time trying to quantify it. We realize that.
Yep, I agree.
Good. Proceed.
The next question came up in a couple of different ways. As you recall, the town is limited to 5.5% revenue generation from the prior year from property tax. So we adjust our mill levy annually to accommodate for that. So the question was, well, if we were to leave it at the 2021 levy, could it be the difference? How much would it be? And could it be utilized for capital projects? So the approximate difference from the 2020, if we were to levy the 2021 levy in 2022, would be about $53,000. After further discussions with the Department of Local Affairs, the state statute does allow for that. There is language in there for that. However, it's apparently rarely utilized option and hasn't been utilized in over 20 years. It would also require an application to DOLA and then an additional public hearing in order for us to go above and beyond what we're currently capped at for capital purposes. Due to the timing and the town's deadline to certify the mill levy for 2022, my thoughts were, if we wanted to proceed with investigating that, it might be good to do that in future budget years, but our timing may not allow for that this year.
I think it's fine as is. How does the rest of the board feel? Mark?
I personally don't have a problem with pursuing it. I don't mind a public hearing because the potential purpose we talked about for using the money would be to help fund the capital fund for street improvements that Lyons is many years behind on. So the prospect of having a public hearing on that doesn't bother me. In fact, I'd welcome it just to be able to explain to the public where our street fund stands and how we've been unable to fund major street projects for many years without a capital fund there. And I'm not sure how much work is required for putting in an application to DOLA, but the idea of the Colorado Department of Local Affairs saying no to a local government that's trying to fund capital improvements for streets would shock me if that happened. And maybe we've gone first on other things too. I mean, I don't mind being a proactive example to other communities that if you can't find another way to pay for vital things like improving your streets, this is one option. So I'm not put off by having to file an application with DOLA, and certainly not by a public hearing, which I think is be a good thing.
The rest of the board?
I would concur with that. The DOLA's granted a lot of additional monies to our town for different projects for flood recovery. They know exactly where we are, so this should not be a surprise to them. So I wouldn't be adverse to looking at this further. because we have other asks and wants in this budget this year, and we have some shortfalls, and with the fire mitigation issues coming up, where are we going to pull it all from? So public hearing and the discussion of the public that wants to participate and pay attention would be welcome.
Further comments?
Would we have to pinpoint exactly what that increase would be targeted for?
The state statute doesn't specify that. I would say that it would probably be recommended, just for transparency purposes, to have a plan in place for that. Just because we do have that capital fund that we started for streets purposes. You know, it might be a good idea to prioritize a few streets projects, you know, to show what we were going to utilize the additional $53,000 or whatever it was, you know, that we chose. And we'd have to keep in mind that the mill levy is definitely capped at that 19.522. So we wouldn't be able to go over that amount, definitely. And I think, you know, the individual that I spoke to at DOLA had spoke with some of the coworkers as well, who maybe had either been around or they were able to dig up the information from whichever municipality had done it 19 or 20 years ago. So, you know, they might be able to help us answer some of those questions.
I just think without a particular purpose for that, Trustee Caravas mentioned the fire mitigation. That may be one candidate. But without a specific purpose for it, I wouldn't necessarily be in favor of it.
Additional comments?
I assume we
Yeah.
would have a particular purpose, and it would be the capital streets fund if we wanted to come up with a list of streets priorities. We've got a long list. Probably do this for 10 years or so, but yeah, I would think it would be for a particular purpose and should be.
Additional comments?
Yes, question, what is the deadline to certify the mill levy for 2022?
Great question. Thank you. It is December 15th. We have to certify back to the county.
So that's 6 weeks. I would prefer to investigate this maybe next year. I think it's pretty tight to try to do it now.
Further comments?
I have one. I'll just say I'm open to it if we name that specific purpose, and I am in favor of roads. I think we've talked about that quite a bit. So when we get to it, I don't think we're deciding that now, but I would just say that I agree. I think, you know, it's something to investigate in a public hearing, and makes sense if that's if we have something specific prescribed for it.
Any further comments? Okay, because of the deadline, let's maybe when we do have to make a decision, get as much information as we possibly can. Finance Director Eystone.
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mhm.
Next question.
The next question was doing an analysis of an in-house planner versus contractual services. I did contact 3 different planning agencies, and planners run anywhere between $80 an hour to $200 an hour. So I used $120 for this analysis, compared to the $40 an hour we pay. We would be paying our Masters of Urban Planning. And so we would be able to get about 10 to 16 hours per week of service if contracted, and 40 hours of service if in-house, specifically because, at least at this time, the individual does not take any town benefits. And
I'm in favor of a full-time planner in town. I think with what's happening on Main Street, what's happening with the Summit development, I think we need to have somebody in-house here with boots on the ground who knows each project intimately. I wouldn't be comfortable handing it off to contracted personnel. We may not get the same person every time. I know that Mayor Pro Tem Browning and all of us agreed that we cut the planning last year by 50K, I believe. But I would like to see it. I would like to see it restored with a full-time planner. I don't know what other positions within the planning department we might be funding if Yanni's position would also be open, but I certainly think at the top of that department, we should have a full-time planner. And Administrator Simonson, you mentioned $40 an hour. I assume that's a loaded rate for our town employee as a planner?
That is with the new proposed salary schedule that did the comparison, that would be the beginning level position coming in. When you say fully loaded, you mean with benefits?
Yes, I mean benefits, insurance, pension.
That is purely just salary.
So $40 an hour, just salary. Okay.
But our current planner does not take our benefits.
Right. Okay, thank you.
And we talked about maybe reviewing that after a year or two and readjusting that as needed. So the position.
Okay, thanks.
Further comments?
Okay.
I'll concur with Trustee Lowell on that.
Me too.
Okay,
The next
Yes.
question was, we were looking at the town's personnel budget and compared to what other communities and percentages were looking like for operating budgets. So the question was, how does the town's personnel budget compare when we include contractual services like sheriff, code enforcement, building inspections, and things like that, which was a very great question. So what we did was we detailed out each contractual service that might be considered personnel in other areas or in other municipalities. And then I redid the pie chart, which then shows that we are approximately, with those above personnel or contractual services, the personnel is the blue pie slice there, and it would be about 45% of the town's total operating budget if it were considered personnel. Did I miss anything on that, Victoria?
No, I think it's, we've listed the price that we're paying, and I think even with adding those, we're well within the guidelines of personnel costs compared to other communities. This is really just, it's more information for the board. If there's any comments or anything you want us to pursue here.
are there any comments?
Yes.
Pro Tem. Go ahead, Trustee Rogan.
Oh, thank you. I know it's hard to see. We're all in a little line there, so I apologize. So when it comes to the legal fees, without Honeywell, it's $152,000. And Administrator Simonson and I had a short email exchange about what it might look like to bring an attorney in-house, even part-time, and whether that would better serve the board. I personally would like to see a list of pros and cons when it comes to that and potential cost savings. I don't know how anybody else feels about that.
Additional comments? Mayor Pro Tem.
Yeah, on that, that's tempting. It's an idea I've thought about too. I think it would be extremely hard to find a qualified municipal law specialist and hire them in a town this size. And you'd always have the problem of if that person left, could you ever replace them? And what do you do during any gap period when you don't have, an attorney on already up to speed on all the ongoing town projects? I mean, it's possible you might be able to find someone who's done municipal law in the past who'd like to retire to a small town or, get back to a smaller place than practicing in some big city or something like that. But the amount you'd have to pay to be competitive, and along with the benefits and just the difficulty of hiring for that type of a special legal specialty, I think it's unlikely. And I doubt that many other towns our size have in-house legal departments, towns of 2,000 people. So it's an idea I've thought about. But and then also, if you hire a municipal attorney, let's say, for example, we hired somebody with qualifications similar to Brandon's, who's done all for various cities, done all kinds of day-to-day municipal work. Then what do you do about litigation, like Honeywell or some of the smaller pieces of litigation that we have? Normally the people who specialize in municipal law, the day-to-day type stuff, aren't litigators. And so you'd still have to hire outside law firms to do things like sue Honeywell or enforce town contracts and that kind of thing. So it's an idea worth looking into, but I think for a town our size, it probably, as a practical matter, would be very difficult to pull off.
Additional comments? Personally, I'm satisfied with Counselor right now. And I think that he has a grasp of where we're going, what we're doing, upgrading the code, things like that. And I would personally like to see him continue. Next question.
Mayor, I have one more comment on another aspect of that.
Go ahead, sir.
I appreciate the updated pie chart. I just wanted to call to the board's attention that at the Saturday budget workshop, there was a list of municipalities that were fairly comparable to Lyons, small towns in Colorado, and listing what their personnel costs were versus Lyons. I went and looked after that workshop, and I believe every single one of those other towns on that list, with the exception of Nederland, which is just in many respects a different kind of place, had in-house police departments. And so the comparison in that list was not exactly apples to apples. If you either need to add our contracted sheriff's department services to compare to those other towns, or subtract out their cost for their in-house police departments. And that's a big chunk of what all municipalities spend on personnel as law enforcement. So I just wanted to call everybody's attention. And this pie chart updates the overall numbers, but to do a town by town comparison as was in those materials for the Saturday workshop, you really have to look at that particular item, and you would have to adjust it for those reasons.
That's a good point. Question 8.
I believe we're on number 7.
7.
Excuse me.
Yep.
Excuse me. I'm sorry. Go
It's
ahead.
okay.
There's our community size merit impact fees. So I did a little research on this. CMLs, they do have a new brochure out, but it was not going to arrive in time for this meeting. So I went online, and this is a presentation that actually Carolyn White, our Laura attorney office, actually did at a CML conference recently regarding impact fees. And I thought it was pretty much answers a lot of questions, basically saying that, impact fees are a way for new development to pay for their own costs, and some of the different calculations on how that can be done, that the board can waive. So when it comes to, do towns our size merit impact fees, I guess it would depend on the size of the development. But the biggest thing I took from reading through this was that in annexations, which would be most of our probably new development, other than the 2 big projects downtown potentially, during annexation is when you can negotiate these anyway. So you wouldn't need a special impact fee. But this is one of those, if the board wants me to have somebody prep a presentation to us, we can certainly do that, give it some consideration. It's similar to the others in that I don't know if that's something, even if we were to do it, it probably would not be in effect for the major, first several months of the first of next year.
Thank you.
Any more
comments?
direction on this item the board wants us to take?
Mayor Pro Tem?
I didn't really comment on that last time, but I've got kind of a philosophical problem with trying particularly in a small town, trying to assess existing neighborhoods already fully developed with impact fees if they need, for example, a new lift station or if they get a new street. Annexing in new developments, yeah, that's different. But I think you lose something by doing, if you take existing neighborhoods and existing parts of town and try to start divvying up, in particular, the utilities and infrastructure costs. Oh, okay, we happen to have an old lift station in Eagle Canyon, so we're going to assess the Eagle Canyon residents more than we assess everybody else. Well, that kind of begs the question of why didn't you put in new lift stations elsewhere? If you're going to pay Second Avenue, you're just going to assess the people on Second Avenue, or are you going to assess everybody on High Street and Old Main Street and First Avenue and Mountain View and that uses Second Avenue? I just think in a small town, trying to do project by project assessments is problematic, and you run the risk of losing a community-wide sense of we're all in this together, and we try to prioritize which projects get done first based on overall community need. And then you have the disparate impact of some of our neighborhoods can afford big assessments and some of our neighborhoods probably can't. And I'm other than the annexation context, I just have philosophical problems with trying to go neighborhood by neighborhood and define the area that's going to be assessed and assess some people in town special fees for things that benefit their neighborhood. It might be different if a particular neighborhood came to the town and said, we really want to, repave our street or something like that, and we're willing to pay for it, and an HOA, for example, proposed that'd be different. But for the town to impose that neighborhood by neighborhood, I'd have problems going that route.
Other comments?
Yeah, maybe I'm missing something here, but my understanding of impact fees are that they are for new development only and are paid by the developer, or as it says in slide 13 here, the ultimate homeowner. It doesn't say anything about existing neighborhoods or existing developments being asked to pay their fair share for road paving or lift station or such. Impact fees, I think I've mentioned this before in these meetings, but impact fees were a fact of life in most small New Hampshire towns, that when a developer came in and suggested developing 20, 50, 100 acres, there would be a sizable impact fee for targeted purposes. For example, in particular, country roads that would have to be redone and repaved. I don't think that there's enough growth imminent in Lyons to warrant looking at impact fees for any of this. I think the time is long past. Stone Canyon, LVP, Eagle Canyon, all of those were prime candidates for putting in impact fees for improving infrastructure leading into those developments, not the infrastructure that they were creating, that the development was creating. So I just can't see on the horizon any large-scale developments that would warrant the town having in place impact fees.
Further comments, Trustee Rogan?
Thank you. I agree with Trustee Lowe about the nature of impact fees. We're not talking about turning Lyons into one giant HOA with assessments per neighborhood. I personally would be interested in learning more about impact fees for new development and for redevelopment. Trustee Lowe, I appreciate your comment about essentially we've already built what we're going to build, but I'm also not so sure that that's going to be the case with annexations and what might happen in the future. So I would personally like more information about what an impact fee program would look like for new development and for redevelopment of commercial areas.
That is correct. At the annexation stage, it's a very easy concept to implement. Further comments? Okay, we'll keep it snappy. Let's move on.
The next was another comparison on how the town's lodging tax compared to other municipalities. As you might remember, the town has a flat $2 fee per night, which is not as common as some of the others that have the percent fee of the rate per night.
Comments?
That figure at the bottom, that, you know, the Moss Rock development, the new hotel at $2 a night would produce $40,000 annually. Could it produce at 2%?
At 2%, it is almost double that.
Yeah, they actually, we got this information directly from them, and they did have they did present a 1.8% that was in their formula, and it was nearly double this amount.
So to change this takes an election, does it not? I know that you have some thoughts on this, Mayor Pro Tem Browning.
It's tempting to look at lodging taxes as like being some kind of a burden or something on the whatever new hotel might be providing lodging. In a couple of respects, it's really not. For one thing, they pass it through to their customers, and anybody who stays in a hotel is used to paying a local lodging tax. Is common everywhere, so it doesn't really put them at a competitive disadvantage to other things. And the other thing is through negotiations of in the development process, the creation of higher lodging taxes, and there are other types of fees that don't have to actually be lodging taxes that hotels sometimes do. Recreational facilities use fees, I've paid those before, for example. It actually can give a new developer of a hotel some more flexibility and creativity in their financing. If the town either lets them keep for a period of time the lodging taxes or the other types of fees that they collect, or the town rebates a percentage of them to it, it gives you more money to work with in financing your development. So it's not necessarily raising the lodging tax is not necessarily any kind of a punitive measure in any respect on those who provide lodging. And in fact, it can actually benefit them by giving them more flexibility in their development.
Okay, any further comments?
I'd like to comment on that.
Go ahead, sir.
I agree with Mayor Pro Tem Browning's assessment that this doesn't cost businesses, but I would like to remind the board that the ordinance as written, and I think as it's intended, the lodging tax has a specific purpose. It's not a general fund free-for-all, or it shouldn't be. It should be specifically allocated towards the impacts that the increased visitation creates on town infrastructure and other services and facilities. So I just want to be clear. I mean, it could considerably be $80,000, but it's not $80,000 that go to the parks. It's $80,000 that should go, as the ordinance is currently written, towards the impacts created by those additional visitors to the town. So I just want to be clear about that and the intention of the ordinance as it's written.
Further comments?
Yeah, Mary Angela, I just have a comment, if that's okay.
Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, so I think both Trustee Wah's point and Mayor Pro Tem Browning's point bring up an interesting thing to remember, that taxes require a vote, fees do not. What kind of interesting is that fees can be, or like kind of like Trustee Wallace was talking about, fees are intended to cover some sort of particular impact. And so it's somewhat interesting. I wasn't here that, the ordinance for the referred measure for the tax was, done the way it was, but there was a particular impact, looking at reimbursing the costs for, of lodging that could be done through a fee as well, which would not require a vote. So I think there's creative ways around this, but I think if we want to change to a percentage, I know there's a memo out there I haven't had a chance to look at about why it was done as a flat fee. We'd have to review again. That would require a vote to change, but fees could be done without going through that process, so long as they are targeted towards a particular purpose.
Good. Thank you, sir.
One more quick comment on that. I might ask the town attorney to double check the ordinance that was passed implementing the lodging tax fee. I wasn't on the board then, but my recollection of the discussions were that at one point there was a suggestion that the lodging tax should be dedicated to basically tourism promotion, which is what Estes Park, for example, does with theirs. And that was not adopted. And instead, my recollection is that the lodging tax goes basically into the general fund, and the board can use it any way they want to. I think there are some whereases in the ordinance that suggest that, the board at the time's preferences for how it should be used. But my thought, my recollection, and I could be wrong, is that it's general fund money.
I was not prepared to look at the ordinance before this, but generally you would not enact a tax with those kinds of limitations on it. So it would be somewhat unique. Not that it hasn't been done, but generally you enact a fee for those types of issues.
It was discussed because everybody knows that Estes Park does it, but Estes Park has its own tourism promotion district, which is why kind of theirs goes that way. And it was talked about for Lions, and I think there are even board votes and discussions on it way back when. But that's just something that needs further research, because I'm going from memory. And
yep.
As I get older, I learned that my memory is less reliable. So somebody should probably check that.
Further comments? All right, we'll move
I
on.
think Trustee Miller is trying to comment, but
Oh, I can't see
maybe-
her. That's
she
the
may be
problem.
muted.
Trustee Miller.
We can't hear
Trustee
you, Trustee
Miller?
Miller.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Did you hear what I said?
No.
No.
Okay, I said, that the attorney, I believe it was Kathy at the time, told us that because we were a statutory town, we had to create a fee. It had to be passed as a fee, a flat fee, not a tax.
Yeah, and I've been told that's the case. I've not seen that memo that was prepared, and it looks like based on the research that was done that there's a mix of both now. So, and interesting, the firm that Kathy works for, they represent some of these towns that have percentages. So I'd be curious if there was a change in thinking there or what exactly changed. But
Which is why we decided on $2. I personally think that the $2 was not enough. I think that needed to be higher than that, because really $10 is kind of the going rate for hotel tax or hotel fees when you go to stay at a hotel. And I also didn't think that the camping in any of the campgrounds should have been included in that because it's in a park. And I think that I think that the camping should be left out of that, and it should be another impact fee for the parks rather than having it included in that particular umbrella of, lodging fee or whatever. That's my personal opinion, but
Mayor Pro Tem.
To clarify a couple of things, the existing lodging tax is a tax. It is not a fee. It's called a tax in the voting in the ballot measure that was passed. It's called a tax in the ordinance. The distinction that the town attorney was making at the time was not between a tax and a fee. It was whether you could do a flat rate tax, which the town attorney said we could, and that's what we did, or whether we could do a statutory town could do a percentage tax, as you see some other statutory towns have done.
Then the memo went out.
So we do have a tax. It's not a fee, and that's one reason I remember it going into the general fund. Now, as to whether we could do a percentage lodging tax, you can see these other towns that have done that. It was my impression at the time, without, I would add, full access to all the, I wasn't on the board, wasn't involved in the executive sessions, that the town attorney at the time was being extremely conservative and advising caution. And if I'd be curious as to when all these other statutory towns did their percentage taxes, and if anybody's challenged it. I think if all these other statutory towns do percentage taxes, Lyons probably can too. I think it was overly conservative on the prior town attorney's part, and I think it's something that we could look into. I don't think we're limited in that respect.
And I definitely agree with, well, it's not, I agree, is the fact that it is a tax, one, and then, generally taxes go towards a general fund purpose, not a specific purpose. Two, that fees don't need a vote. And three, it is interesting. I have not seen that memo. I don't know. I can't speak, wasn't there at the time. I can't speak to the analysis that was done, but it is interesting that a number of statutory towns have done percentages since then. And that Berthoud specifically is represented by the same firm that Kathy Guckenberger is a part of. So I'd be curious to see when Berthoud enacted theirs. It'd just be interesting to know. And I think if someone had been challenged, I would know about it through CML. And so I think it's unlikely that, one, that anyone has been challenged, or, and then that two, that the conventional thinking is still that statutory towns cannot do a percentage. But it'd be curious to research more for sure.
Does the board mind if Counselor researches that further and comes back to us with options? Because I think it's too low, to be perfectly honest with you.
I agree. I think it's something we should get a little further research on, be worth looking at.
Any other comments?
Can't really budget for it changing, correct? I mean, we're talking months and months for this to happen if we were to change it. So, I mean, this is a budget discussion. I think we should move on.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Next question.
Question number 9 was what was the ongoing cost of the creative district? There is an attachment that was included in the packet where they detail out a 3-year plan, I believe. And then also of note is that they plan to form their own 501(c)(3). And then at that point, town contributions would be voluntary.
Comments?
Town funding is always voluntary. This year or any other year to year. So I don't, I think we have a workshop planned or something coming up on the whole organization of the creative district and the financing and the controls of the expenditures and all that. And I think this might be better taken up at that time, because if they are going to form a 501(c)(3), I want to know who exactly they are and how the board's going to be selected and what role the town, if any, will play in that. There's a lot of questions there, probably beyond the scope of a quick budget workshop.
And 10, do we feel the same about 10?
Yeah. We confirmed that all their fundraising does come through the town budget. So there's no commingling of funds. It's all accounted for their fundraising as revenue and expenditure going in and out of the town budget right now. But that we can bring that up further if we have a separate creative district.
I don't think commingling is the right word there. I think that's kind of confusing. The LAHC, as I understand it, gets funds from the town annual appropriation. It was $8,000 this year if you look in the budget. And they also raise money on their own of various things they do, of events and art sales and in the past and all that kind of thing. And I didn't see the fundraising aspects of that in the budget. Maybe it's in there and I don't know where to find it. But again, that's a topic that goes to the overall organization. There's a commingling. It isn't really, I don't know who used that word. It might've been me, but it's really not the right thing. And then it's really just evaluating all of the different sources of funds that the LAHC or a new creative district would have and deciding what role should the town play in that. Does the town care how the LAHC or the creative district spends funds that they raise on their own that don't come from town general revenues? Do we want to give them blank check on that? Or does the town board have an ongoing concern of if they raise $20,000 and they spend it on something that is controversial, should the board have a role in that? I think this all needs a fair amount of attention in a separate format.
Additional comments?
I have a question, if I might, and I apologize, my internet is unstable tonight, so if I freeze, please be patient. So the workshop that Mayor Pro Tem was talking about the creative district, will that workshop happen before we have the budget hearing?
We don't have anything identified. I was going to go back and look at when we thought we did that. So I don't have anything on the agenda right now, but we can certainly, there's still room on November 15th. And December is quite open, so we can have one sooner than later.
I would like that because I would like to be able to let the creative district folks know whether they can expect to be funded for 2022.
And I agree. Further comments? Okay, number 11.
The question came up of what is the budgetary difference between the town providing 3% versus 5% for retirement? And the total difference for 2022 would be approximately $24,756.
And is the essence of this question perhaps retainment, Administrator Simonson?
Well, it was actually, if you recall, right now, the town only provides 3% if the employee puts in 3%. And the majority of our employees who are the labor force are not contributing at all. And so what I had proposed was I would like to automatically do a 3% retirement contribution for all employees. And we do budget for that now, but not everyone takes advantage of that. And my request was to consider going up to a 5% for those who want to go to 5. The town would only contribute 3. They could go, but we would match up to 5 for those who wanted to.
Comments?
So.
Oh, I recall. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Greg.
No, I was just going to ask Administrator Simonson. So you're suggesting even if an employee is not contributing any money, you would put in 3% in a 403B or a 401K for that employee?
The only thing we have as an employer under 50 is an IRA.
Okay.
So part of their employment package would be we'd contribute 3% toward their retirement automatically. They don't have to match it to get it.
And back to Mayor Angelo's original question or statement, do you think that the increase to 5% on the town match would sweeten the pot for any hiring prospects or retaining of present employees?
We do get that question. And I do have another comparison of what other communities are contributing. If the board wants to see that, it seems to be in line with what people are contributing. And usually it's not an IRA either. It's usually another source, but for us being very small right now, that's the option we have. We do, if we move forward with an HR consultant, she thinks that there's some other alternatives we could put out there.
Trustee White?
Yeah, that's exactly how I recall the conversation, Administrator Simonson. So thank you for that. And, you know, I want to be clear, the 3% is already budgeted and is typically something that we don't spend the budget for. But we would in this case.
Yes.
You know, I think the same people that are contributing today will now get 3%, and the people who are contributing will get another 2%. Is really probably how it's going to work out. So I think for the planner position and some of those positions, it's probably more likely to have an impact, the extra 2%.
Further comments? I don't have a problem with number 11. Number 12.
The question was how much in legal fees related to Honeywell is in the wastewater professional services account? And is there not enough budgeted for 2022? To date, there's approximately a little over 84,000 in legal expenses in the wastewater fund for 2021. We do still have a couple months left of the year. And then Victoria did reach out to the attorneys to get an average of what we pay per year and what they think it's going to cost for 2022. And we do think we're a little bit low for 2022. There's a section down below further down in this attachment where we suggest adding a little bit extra into that budget because they're thinking 100,000 for 2022 related to Honeywell.
Comments?
Mary Ann, can I make one correction, one verbiage correction in the second bullet?
Go ahead, sir.
So it says that, certain matters, we recover attorney's fees for or other compensation. It says that they were credited in the attorney's fees, and that's actually not correct. They were not credited in the calculation of total attorney fees. And so if we recover attorney's fees through a particular case or one monetary damages, we did not subtract that from the total amount of attorney's fees that were included in those numbers. So just a minor correction.
Okay. Thank you. Comments?
I don't think we specifically got attorney's fees for any of those three listed matters that I know of. We got an overall monetary payment in each of them, but I don't think any of it was designated as attorney's fees when we got it.
In the Freising matter, we recovered all of our attorney's fees.
Did we got enough to match it, I guess, put it that way. No?
We recovered damages and fully compensated our attorney's fees.
Good to know.
Yeah. Okay.
Mayor, we have about 15 minutes is all we have left.
Okay.
So the next item had to do with the clause within the summit agreement that the town would set aside up to $150,000 if the construction costs could be proven to be well over what was budgeted. And so this comes out with, if you recall, we received $275,000 of ARPA funds this year, of which we are using those toward First Avenue Water, Welch Court Sewer, and Longs Peak overage costs. We will be getting another $275,000 in January. The staff recommendation is that we just set aside $150,000 of that. We should know soon, about that same time, hopefully, if there's going to be an overage cost in construction. If not, we can reallocate this $150 to town projects. And it would be specifically for water and sewer infrastructure to Summit so that it stays within the ARPA guidelines. And comes back to us as a public improvement.
Any estimates on the additional costs of the?
No, my understanding is construction costs are coming down. So
No, I'm not talking about Summit. I'm talking about Oh, where is it? Where we ran into rock twice,
Oh,
Long's Peak. Do we have any idea of what the costs of that are going to be?
They have a construction schedule, but they did a geotech survey, so those costs will be on them.
Okay, all right, good. Next,
The next question had to do with how much would we have to raise fees in the water fund to gain $500,000. So we gave you several different scenarios to try to give the board some idea of what that might look like. Again, if this were to happen, we'd probably need a study. It would take a little time. So for this budget, this is not built in at this time.
and is this for the 3 months that we're required to maintain? Is that
It was one of the questions that came up at our workshop. It was asked, how much would we have to raise rates to increase the water fund by 500,000? So we gave you some.
But what was the reasoning of
It
having?
was for reserves. Mhm.
Okay, all right, the 3-month reserve on each of the funds. Is that right?
It was just it was the number that was asked, 500,000.
Okay. All right,
But we get approximately half that if the Summit deal closes, right? 244,000 coming from Summit water and sewer fees.
That's built into the budget.
That's already built in, so this would be in addition to that.
Mhm.
so to have the 3-month reserve, what is that number? To have the 3-month reserve in each one of those funds? That's the number that I would like.
It's right there on your screen, sir.
Okay, I can't see it, it's too
Yeah,
small.
I'm sorry. Trying to
That's
make
all
it
right.
bigger for you.
That's all right.
So the water, so here's, it starts, you can't see the whole thing, but so this is the number for the general fund, which
Okay.
we're meeting. So anything you can look down, where you see the negatives here are where we
Yes.
may not meet it. So that would be the electric fund will just barely not meet it. And then the water and sewer fund will not meet it by 145,000 based on current projections.
It should have $594,000 for a 3-month reserve.
Yes, and we will have approximately 448. So we are just shy of 145,000.
So why are we asking the ratepayers to come up with an additional 500,000 if that's not what we need to meet the 3-month reserve? Are we
Sir, it was
talking
just a
about
question asked by
capital- Are we
Mayor Pro
talking about
Tem.
capital improvements? What are we talking about?
Mayor Pro Tem, you were the one who asked this question, I believe.
Nobody suggested asking the ratepayers for $500,000 that
No.
was proposed. The issue was, how much money would it take to get the water wastewater fund back up to the required 3 months reserve, and pay, if we have to up another $50,000 for the legal fees for the Honeywell suit, and if we have to do $300,000 roughly of upgrades to the wastewater treatment plant, and if we get $254,000 from Summit fees. What's the bottom line? And it's not $500,000. So you have to go through all those assumptions and then see how short you are.
Mhm. And we also have the capability of using, don't we have the capability of using some of the federal funds to upgrade the sewer plant, Madam Administrator?
Hopefully.
I'm just
Again,
not,
this was no indication of that we were going to raise rates. It was just simply a question
okay,
that someone asked that we came up with the
Okay.
options of what it would take.
okay. I'm just not a fan of raising rates, that's all. Okay. Yes, go ahead, sir.
In addition to that, though, Cassie, if you want to put that screenshot back up, please.
Sure.
Is on the wastewater fund down there, the net change position for 2022 is a loss of $405,000. We've we've dropped that fund from, I believe, since I first got on the board in 2016, it was above $2 million, and we've been dropping it, intentionally using the benefits to offset costs for the ratepayers. But it looks like we're getting to a point that short-term increase, depending on how our lawsuit goes, is probably going to be necessary. And the UEB is aware of this and has looked at it. So they are ready to go if this board says, look at it, give us what you think. Because I too would be very concerned that seeing us in a negative position in our enterprise funds, it's a bad thing to be at, bad position to be at, especially if we have to go to bond. If there's a major incident, something unforeseen happens, we don't have the funds, we have to go to bond, and we're running a negative. That's not looking good for us.
Okay.
I, for one, would sure like to hear what the UEB's thoughts on this are. They've looked at this for ongoing. They do this year after year, and I'd sure like to hear what they have to say in terms of recommendations or options and that type of thing. I'd really like, if they're able to do that, I'd sure like to get a report from them.
And I would as well. I just want the UEB to keep in mind that our water bond will be paid off in 2 years. That'll be I know it's 2 years from now, but that'll be an additional $320,000 a year that we won't have. It might even be more, actually. So as long as we strategize and try to keep the rate increase as low as possible, I'd sure like to see that. Any other comments? Let's move on.
Next one was, should there be a stormwater investment fee? That was just a comment made. So we talked about the staff level. We would need to do a full survey of what is the infrastructure needs for stormwater to come up with a calculation of what does it cost to maintain that system. So it's something we certainly can take a look at, or the board could assign to the UEB. But you probably would not be collecting on revenues until late 2022 in regard to this budget.
Okay, comments? Let's move on.
The next question was verifying the unrestricted balance in the water and sewer fund, which was related back to kind of the previous discussion. And I did confirm with the auditor that the unrestricted 2020 balance is accurate. And I went through some of the work papers and was able to backtrack into those numbers. And 2020 balance is accurate.
Okay. Comments, questions? Let's move on.
Below are some of the staff questions that we had for the board this evening. The first one was how much, if any, the board would like to set aside for the capital fund in 2022. Right now, we don't have budgeted a transfer like we did in 2021. There is funding available in the general fund if you wanted to make a transfer for 2022.
Comments? Mayor Pro Tem.
To the extent that they're that some of the appropriations for the 2021 budget are not spent, like we're $50,000 under budget in the category, can we reallocate those at year end for a transfer to the capital fund for 2022?
We could include those in a budget amendment in 2022. Should we decide to do that at that time?
I've been looking through. I think there are several categories where we could potentially do that. And then, and this goes directly to what we talked about earlier. I would like to pursue further with DOLA. That's $59,000 or roughly whatever the calculation would be of keeping the mill levy the same. And then, as you say, we do have. I'm getting an unstable internet message too. Sorry. And then, as you said, we do have some overages, some unexpectedly high sales tax collections in the general fund for 2021, and I would like to see some of that go into the capital fund. I would not like to see a year go by where we don't put anything into the capital fund. And I assume that means the streets fund. I would like to put as much as we can into the streets fund, up to $300,000. If we can't do that much from all those sources, then maybe we do half that next year. But I really would like to start a year after year set aside for streets. And I think if we don't do that for 1 year, then we're making it discretionary funding again year to year. And that's what got us behind in our streets to begin with.
Comments? Next.
Does the board want a budget for any of the following bonuses for 2022? If so, how much? The bonuses that were discussed in the workshop were hiring bonuses, retainment bonuses, vesting bonuses, and end of year bonuses.
Comments?
Yes, I would like to, I think it's important that we do both a hiring bonus and a retainment bonus. In my experience, it causes some conflict. If you have people of a similar pay grade, a new person is hired in and he gets a hiring bonus, the person that was hired a year and a half or 2 years before got nothing, even though they're both in the same pay grade. So I would suggest both A and B, hiring and retainment. Now, I don't know what the appropriate amount is. Did we discuss a dollar figure at the workshop?
Other comments? Go ahead, sir.
In our Saturday session, I had asked for the amount of money that was budgeted for all employees and then what we didn't pay due to staffing shortages, and looked at for the purpose of coming up with end of year bonuses to all those that were working. And of course, at the discretion of Administrator Simonson, knowing that a lot of people were here at the office when others were at home and put forth a lot more effort than others. So I don't see those figures here. I might have missed it, but I'd still like to know what we had budgeted to pay positions that weren't actually filled throughout the year. So I mean, there's excess money that we had planned to use, and I'd like to use some of that for end of year bonuses and maybe to help fund what Trustee Lola just brought about A and B also.
We do have, I do have a full memo prepared with those numbers and a recommendation for end of this year. I think what this question is we heard from some of the board that you thought next year might be similar, and that some of you were supportive of hiring and retaining bonuses. So we just didn't know if you wanted to build it into the 2022 budget or only do it if we have excess.
Comments?
Is a retainment bonus the same thing as a merit bonus?
No, retainment is at the end of the year, if there is extra left over from salary staffings, that you would split that between people that were there for the whole year for staying employed during difficult times.
The opposite of a new hire bonus or a hiring bonus. It's a thanks for staying here bonus. Thanks for not leaving and not having to make us hire somebody else.
As long as there's discretion on awarding those, and that everybody doesn't get the same retainment bonus, because frankly, in the years I've been familiar with town employees, there are some town employees I would really like to retain and would hate to lose, and there's some that I wish would have left. So I don't think across the board. I think it ought to be discretion with the town administrator to parcel those out to retain the employees we really want to retain.
I'd like to see this built into the budget, and I'd like to float the idea of a recruitment bonus, even if it's just a couple $100 for somebody who brings in an employee who ultimately is hired and stays for 6 months.
Great ideas.
I'll just say from past experience, and I have to give Administrator Simonson the choice on this. I found that sometimes the referral bonus from existing employees, especially if it's a good cash incentive, causes people to refer a lot of their friends that may not be qualified in any way, shape, or form, but require an interview out of common courtesy for the referring employee. So it actually can impact the hiring process. So I know it sounds like a good idea and it sounds like something that would make sense, but I don't know if the experience that I've had it can actually cost you more time and energy than help you find good employees. But I don't know if that's the case with hiring a town of Lyons.
Okay.
We're basically out of time. How do we want to proceed?
We really need to know number 4 on this list. The others can probably wait, but we do need to know if there's an interest in paying off the electric note or continuing our regular debt service to keep that fund healthier for another year or 2.
What's the percentage interest on that note?
Oh, gosh.
It was 5.
5%, I believe. Yeah. Might be a little bit more, but.
And how much is it?
It would save over through payoff, I believe, $16,000 is what it would save by paying it off.
But how much would do you have that handy about how much it would, was it like 140,000?
Heat care. Bear with me.
I'd like to again get the UEB input on this because they know the health of the electric fund with just purchasing the meters, and we know how much we're going to get from a summit on electric fees. So I think it's just a matter of mathematics. I don't like a 5% note, to be perfectly honest with you, but how does the board feel about that?
Answer that question, no. I don't think 16,000 in savings is worth it. We're basically kind of financing the money in there at 5%, but with no upfront, bond issuance fees and attorney's fees and all that. I think the prudent thing to do is maintain the electric fund above the 3-month reserve and not pursue the early repayment of that. So I would answer no. And I think it is a matter of math. And to me, the math says the savings isn't worth it.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anything else
I don't know.
here?
I think we need a strategy forward on these boards and commissions because we are trying to, put together the final agenda here to be able to bring forward for public input. We attached all their different requests. Most of them seem very reasonable. If you want to open that up, Cassie. The one I think that we have to talk about is the Park and Rec Commission and which of these we want to include in the budget, or if all of these, because right now they're not all built in.
Those were just a ranking of priorities. They took the projects there were. They weren't requesting that all those be funded this year.
No, I know it's for the board to decide which ones you would like to fund next year, so we can put them in the budget.
And in that list, from my recollection of that meeting, was that at the recommendation of Parks Director Cosgrove, that really the dirt jump park improvements were higher priority than Lot F Trail, which is just kind of an idea. The dirt park is there right now and is in shape and has an existing, kind of a fairly well estimated bid on what it would take to fix it, whereas the other one's just kind of a concept for the future. So I really think those ought to be reversed, but we've already made our decision on the St. Vrain Trail extension. And my view of the Martin Parcel fire mitigation is it needs to be done.
Further comments? Okay.
So no funding for Good Old Days. ball field lights, second sports court, none of those to be budgeted at this point. Is that correct?
I would draw the line under, it's just me personally, I would draw the line at 3A with A and B being reversed under 3. I would stop the dirt jump.
Okay, that's, everybody else okay with that? I mean, it just means we need,
To go forward.
Well,
I,
it's hard.
I can't make a decision unless I see dollar amounts applied to these.
Yeah, I can't either. I definitely am not willing to call it on all that stuff.
it's, is that attached in the packet as well, Cassie?
I'd be happy to add some background. Like me too. This is Dave.
Go ahead, sir.
Just need some numbers, Dave, when we're out of time, just so you know.
Yeah, I spoke directly with the chair of the Parks and Rec Commission when he submitted this. The top 3 were their top 3 priorities. The others were to be prioritized later in future budgets, minus Good Old Days, which was being talked about still, from my understanding, as a potential special event. And the top 3 were already in the budget. So the dirt jump bike park is already in, the improvements are already in the budget. We discussed them at the workshop at $48,000 with the proposal that we put in there. The Martin parcel fire mitigation we put in as a potential grant match with everything that's going on at $25,000. And then, of course, the St. Vrain Trail extension is in there with the grant match, which I believe was like $152,000.
So those are in the budget. So I guess the question then is there anything else here that the board wants to add to the budget that isn't in there right now? Of the items listed anyway.
I'd like to see a figure on the small dog park.
I agree.
Okay. And then the wildfire task force did a large attachment as well, but they did not have very specific numbers. I think this could be, you know, as small or as large as the board wants to invest in this.
There were some estimated cost per acre ranges in there. And the Martin parcel is 8 acres, but like Dave says, it's already in there, so.
That's, yeah, some. Is there any additional the board wants us to add at this point? Or would you prefer excess goes to the street general fund or street capital improvement?
Comments? No?
Okay. If not, we might want to have additional time to go through this wildlife plan. They put a lot of work into this wildfire plan, to see if there's any additional, but otherwise right now, and I guess you don't have to decide right this minute, but the intent was to add any changes from tonight's discussion into the budget or remove items from the budget, and try to host a public hearing on November 15th to get public input on the budget proposal. And then it would come to the board December 6th for consideration for adoption, giving us a 2-week window if we're not ready. Does that still seem reasonable, or does the board want to have one more session before we take it to public?
How does the board feel?
I think there's some issues we haven't discussed and need more time on.
I do as well. Is that going to take a special meeting, Administrator Simonson?
No, we can do that on November 15th if that's the preference, or you can schedule something different. We'll set it all back 2 weeks if that's
Okay,
what the
let's
board-
take a look. We'll take a look and see and let everybody know.
And
Because I do
can-
think there are some questions that need to be answered.
if there's something we can answer in the meantime so we can get research, that would be great.
Okay.
I've got one thing, and this is something we haven't discussed, is how we're gonna fund the $60,000 match for the Broadway project. And the question related to that is how much is in the URA fund projected through 2022? But we have to decide how we're going to fund that match. I'm not in favor of taking it from streets.
We do have several issues to discuss and make final decisions on. Okay, so we'll do that in the future.
And a full-time code compliance officer. We talked about that. We don't have a dollar figure for that yet.
Oh,
I thought it was in there.
I did too.
Or maybe so. I didn't-
It is.
Yeah,
I'd just like to say I'd be willing to have a special meeting or a special workshop in order to go
Yeah.
through that before the 15th.
I
So
think
that
so
maybe
too.
We can
I
stay
think
on
so,
the
too.
schedule.
To really drill down on it, I think so too, Trustee Watt. And I'll discuss that with Administrator Simonson and plan a strategy and let everybody know.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you all for your input
Thank
tonight.
you. So we go into our regular meeting now?
You're going to
Regular
have to
meeting
go.
to vote on the executive session, yes.
Okay. So call a regular meeting to order. And then do the roll call, Counselor?
Yes.
Just like we're going into a normal meeting, we're just gonna, the first item of business is gonna be voting on the executive session.
Okay. Call the Monday, November 1st, 2021, regular Board of Trustees meeting to order. Could we have the roll call, Madam Clerk?
Yes, Mayor Angelo,
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Browning,
Present.
Trustee Lowell,
Present.
Trustee Miller,
Present.
Trustee Caravas,
Present.
Trustee Waugh,
Present.
Trustee Rogan.
I think she may have left prematurely.
I did send out the link for the executive session, so she may have just hopped on there.
Yep.
Okay,
Did.
we'll
She
do the-
told me she lost her internet, so she'll join us in
Yeah,
executive
well,
session.
please all rise and recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Entertain a motion to go into executive session.
So moved.
Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second to go into executive session. I'll call for the vote, Madam Clerk.
Mayor Angelo,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Browning,
Mayor,
Your turn. We need to state the purpose before we go in, correct?
I'm sorry, Mayor Pro Tem.
we were
You
trying
know
to stop
that
you.
you've done this a million times. Go ahead, sir.
I guess procedurally, I would, if somebody wants to withdraw that motion, I'll make the
Yeah.
motion.
I'll withdraw my motion.
Okay. I move that we go into executive session pursuant to CRS sections 24-6-4024E and 24-6-4024B for the purpose of determining positions relative to matters that may be subject to negotiations, developing strategy for negotiations, and instructing negotiators, and for legal advice from attorneys representing the town's municipal court complaint, representing the town in its municipal court complaint against Dennis Callahan.
Do we have a motion
Need a second.
we need a second.
and a second? Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, I'll call for the vote.
Mayor Angelo,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Browning,
Aye.
Trustee Caravas,
Aye.
Trustee Miller,
Yay.
Trustee Waugh, Trustee Lowell.
Aye.
Okay, see you in a little while.